Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into something, a little unexpected.
Unexpectedly fascinating, I hope.
I think so, yeah. We're talking about embroidery. You know, that thing your grandma might do while watching TV?
Well, maybe not just your grandma. It's actually making a comeback in a big way.
I've noticed that. But
Mm.
today we're not just talking about the latest trends, we're going deep into the research.
Oh, yes. There's actually a lot of really interesting scientific research emerging about the potential benefits of embroidery.
And that's what we're going to unpack today, right?
Exactly. We'll be looking at a document called Stitchings of Well-Being, which explores how embroidery can help with, you guessed it, well-being.
Okay, so less about the cute cross-stitch patterns and more about, like, what it does for our brains and bodies.
Exactly. It's not just a hobby. It might actually be a therapeutic tool.
Okay, color me intrigued. Now, I think we all know that life in the 21st century can be, well, a little bit stressful.
A little bit. It's constant. The pressure to perform, the information overload, it's all very taxing on the nervous system.
So true. I mean, between work and family and just trying to stay informed, it feels like there's never a moment to just breathe.
And that's a real problem because chronic stress has been linked to all sorts of health issues, both physical and mental.
Right, we're talking about like heart disease, digestive problems, anxiety, depression, even cognitive decline.
The list goes on and on. So finding healthy ways to manage stress is becoming more and more crucial.
Which brings us back to embroidery, right?
Right. Because it turns out that the simple act of stitching might actually be a really effective way to combat stress and improve focus.
Okay, so how does that work? Is it like some kind of magic spell we cast with every stitch?
Well, not magic, but there is a science to it. When we're stressed, our body goes into this fight or flight mode.
Oh yeah, that adrenaline rush.
Exactly. Heart rate goes up, muscles tense, breathing gets shallow.
Like a deer in the headlights?
Exactly like that. But activities like embroidery can actually trigger the opposite, the relaxation response.
So it's like hitting the brakes on that stress response.
Precisely. Heart rate slows down, muscles relax, breathing deepens. You start to feel a sense of calm.
Sounds pretty amazing, actually.
It is. And what's great about embroidery is that it's so accessible, you don't need any fancy equipment or expensive classes.
I do love a good low-cost hobby.
And it's something you can do pretty much anywhere. Waiting for an appointment, stitch a few rows, commuting on the train, get some stitching done.
You're really selling me on this. But what about the actual research? What kind of evidence is there to support these claims?
Well, while research specifically on embroidery is still kind of in its early stages, there are a lot of promising studies on similar crafts, like knitting.
Okay, so like, what have they found?
Well, for example, one large-scale study found that people who knit regularly report feeling calmer and happier overall.
Interesting. So it's not just anecdotal, there's actual data to back it up.
Yep. And another study showed that knitting could actually reduce anxiety and obsessive thoughts in patients with anorexia.
Wow, that's really powerful.
And these studies are giving us some really valuable clues about how these kind of rhythmic and repetitive crafts can really benefit mental health.
I'm starting to get the picture. So it's not just about making something pretty, it's about the process itself.
Exactly. And the way that process can impact our minds and bodies in a positive way.
Okay, I'm definitely hooked. But now I need to know more about what's actually happening in our brains while we're embroidering. Is there like a scientific explanation for all this?
Oh, there is. And it gets pretty fascinating. But that's a story for another time. Or rather, the next part of our deep dive.
All right, so you've really got me hooked on this idea of embroidery as like a brain hack.
Right. It's pretty amazing.
It is. But before we get too deep into the brain science part, you mentioned something about the history of embroidery. Like it's more than just a craft.
Oh, absolutely. The history of embroidery it's incredibly rich. We're talking thousands of years across cultures all over the world.
Okay, I had no idea. I guess I always thought of it as something, kind of like a Victorian pastime.
Oh, it goes way back further than that. We're talking ancient Egypt, ancient China. It's been used to decorate everything from clothing and tapestries to religious artifacts and even ceremonial objects.
Wow, so it's like a global tradition.
Absolutely. And in many cultures, it wasn't just about, pretty decorations. It was often tied to spiritual practices, healing rituals.
Oh, that's interesting. Like what kind of rituals?
Well, for example, in some Native American cultures, the act of stitching was seen as a way to connect with ancestors and the natural world.
Hmm. That's kind of beautiful, actually.
He is. And in traditional Chinese medicine, there's this belief that embroidery can actually help stimulate acupuncture points.
Really? I've never heard that before.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's like this idea that, the needle and thread can help balance the body's energy flow.
So it's almost like a form of healing.
You could say that. And I think that connection to something larger than ourselves, it's still relevant today.
I see what you mean. Like in our modern world where everything is so fast-paced and digital.
Exactly. Embroidery offers this way to slow down, connect with a timeless tradition, and just be present in the moment.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Like when I picture myself embroidering, I imagine like a quiet evening, a cup of tea, just focusing on the rhythm of the stitches.
Exactly. And that focus, that mindfulness, it's key to reducing stress and finding that sense of calm.
So it's not just about what you create, it's about the act of creating it.
Exactly. And that journey, that process, it can be incredibly therapeutic.
It's like a form of moving meditation almost.
You could say that. And there's also that feeling of accomplishment, right? When you finish a project and you see something beautiful that you've created with your own hands.
Oh, for sure. It's like, a tangible representation of your effort and your creativity.
Absolutely. And that can be a real boost for your self-esteem,
Yeah.
especially if you're someone who maybe doesn't feel very, very creative in other areas.
Yeah, I get that. It's like proof that you can make something beautiful.
Exactly. And that feeling of agency, of control, it can be really empowering.
Speaking of empowerment, it's interesting to think about how historically embroidery has often been seen as like women's work.
That's true. It has a long and complex history, often tied to gender roles and societal expectations.
Yeah, for centuries it was like relegated to the domestic sphere, seen as a pastime, not a serious art form.
Right. But that's definitely changing.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I've seen some incredible contemporary embroidery art that really challenges those traditional notions.
Absolutely. There's been this resurgence of interest in embroidery, and artists are using it to explore all kinds of themes, from identity and body image to social justice and even political activism.
It's being reclaimed as this powerful form of self-expression.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole topic so fascinating. Embroidery, it's not just about stitching pretty pictures. It's a medium for storytelling, a way to connect with our heritage, and even a way to make our voices heard.
Okay, you've totally convinced me. But now I really want to dive into the science behind all these benefits. Like, what can you tell me about the research that's been done on embroidery's effects on the brain and body?
Well, buckle up because that's where things get really interesting. And that's exactly what we're going to explore in the final part of our deep dive.
All right, you've really gotten me curious about all this talk about the science of embroidery.
All right. There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, like what's actually happening in our brains when we, pick up a needle and thread.
Well, like we mentioned, the research on embroidery specifically it's still pretty new.
Mm-hmm.
But we can actually learn a lot from studies that have been done on similar crafts like knitting and crocheting.
Oh, interesting. So what have they found?
Well, some of these studies have used brain imaging techniques,
Like what?
like fMRI, to actually see what's going on in the brain while people are, knitting away.
Okay.
And they found that knitting activates certain areas of the brain,
Which ones?
the ones that are associated with attention, focus, and even emotional regulation.
So it's like knitting is literally lighting up the parts of our brains that help us stay calm and focused.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it makes sense when you think about the mental processes that are involved, right?
Yeah.
You're concentrating on the stitches, you're counting rows, you're following patterns, you're coordinating your hand movements. It's actually a pretty complex cognitive workout.
Wow. It's like a secret brain gym membership, but way more relaxing.
Right. And these brain benefits, they go beyond just focus and attention.
Oh.
Some researchers believe that the rhythmic and repetitive nature of these crafts, they can actually help to train our brains to be more present, more mindful.
Oh, that's fascinating. I've heard so much about mindfulness and its benefits, but I never realized that something like embroidery could be like a pathway to that.
It's definitely a possibility. And
Yeah.
then there's a whole research on neurochemicals, which adds another layer of intrigue to all of this.
Oh, right. We were talking about those feel-good chemicals, right?
Yeah.
The endorphins, the serotonin, the dopamine.
Exactly. The happiness trifecta, as you called it.
I love that term.
Well, studies have shown that engaging in activities that we find pleasurable, especially ones that involve creativity and a sense of accomplishment, can actually trigger the release
Mm.
of these neurotransmitters.
So it's like each stitch we make is like a little dose of happiness for our brains.
It's a lovely way to think about it. And while more research is definitely needed to really understand the precise neurochemical changes that happen during embroidery,
Hmm.
it's it's certainly plausible that these feel-good chemicals are playing a role in its therapeutic effects.
So we're relaxed, we're focused, we're happy. Is there anything embroidery can't do?
Well, it's it's not a magic cure-all, of course,
Right, right.
but it is this simple and accessible and enjoyable activity that can have this remarkably positive impact on our overall well-being.
I'm sold. But I am curious about like what's next for research in this area. What are some of the big questions that scientists are still hoping to answer?
Well, one area that's really interesting is comparing the effectiveness of embroidery to other stress reduction techniques,
Like what?
like mindfulness meditation or yoga. We need more rigorous studies to really determine if one approach is superior or if they all kind of work in different ways.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's like figuring out which tool is best for the job, you know?
Exactly. And researchers are also interested in exploring what the optimal dosage of embroidery is.
Like how much is enough?
Yeah, exactly. How often should we be stitching? For how long? What types of projects are most effective?
It's like finding the perfect recipe for stress relief and mental clarity.
Exactly. And then there's the whole world of neuroimaging.
Uh-huh.
Scientists are using techniques like fMRI to actually visualize what's happening in the brain while people are embroidering.
Wow.
Imagine like being able to actually see which brain regions light up and how different neural pathways are activated during the process.
That's incredible. It's like peeking inside the brain to see the magic of embroidery in action.
It's a captivating thought. And this kind of research, it could lead to even more personalized therapeutic approaches in the future.
Oh, how so?
Like imagine if we could tailor embroidery interventions to individual needs based on their specific brain activity patterns.
Oh, that's like the future of mental health care. It's amazing to think that something as simple and as ancient as embroidery could hold so much potential for improving our well-being.
It truly is remarkable. And while we wait for the findings of future research, there's really no harm in exploring the benefits of embroidery for yourself, right?
Mm. Right.
Pick up a needle and thread, find a quiet corner, and just see where the rhythm of stitching takes you.
I love that. It's like a journey of self-discovery, but with thread.
Exactly. And you might just be surprised by the sense of calm, the focus, and the creativity that you discover along the way.
Well said. I think that's the perfect note to end on. We've explored the history, the culture, the science, and the sheer joy of embroidery.
It's been a fascinating journey.
It really has, and I hope this deep dive has inspired you to give embroidery a try, or if you're already a stitcher, to appreciate the craft in a whole new light.
Happy stitching, everyone.
Until next time.